Good evening. In a scathing report or a comment on the current election commission, Dr. S.Y. Quraishi, former Chief Election Commissioner, has basically written that he believes that the current election commission is weak-kneed and is becoming increasingly difficult to defend. He said the election commission must act tough, and it's a pity that the Supreme Court had to constantly remind the commission of its powers. And most importantly, he's been quoted saying that the trust of the people cannot be taken for granted, because as we know, the democracy is in the Election Commission's hands. Joining me on the show right now is Dr. Quraishi. Dr. Quraishi, good evening, and thank you for giving us your time. I want to understand what prompted you, first of all, to write the article that you wrote 2 days ago. Why do you believe that this particular version of the Election Commission is difficult to defend?
Well, you know, we have been seeing on the TV and in the print media for the last 2 months, many actions or omissions and commissions of the Election Commission have been questioned. Instead of politicians being in the dock, we find election commissions conducted in the dock, which is a very painful thing to see, because we have seen how Election Commission is the most respected institution in the country, the most trusted institution in the country, and no fingers were ever raised. Occasionally, even if there were some questions asked, they were momentary and they were answered. But the fact that this is happening so regularly is quite upsetting. And I did not say that the Election Commission is weak-kneed. I only referred to a letter which was written by senior retired civil servants to the President, in which they described the Commission as weak-kneed. Now, anything adverse said about the Election Commission pains me, because I feel as if I am being attacked. And you may have noticed that I have been virtually a self-appointed spokesman of the Election Commission, defending them or explaining things which they should have been explaining. They have not been on the social media. As a result, people have questions. They have legitimate questions which they want answered. So somebody has to answer, and I have been doing all that. In such a situation, anything adverse, and if I think that they should have been doing something differently, of course we leave it to their wisdom. They are all very experienced and bright people. It's not for me to be advising them. But at the same time, questions are asked of me also, what would I have done? Probably that is easier to answer. But I have been avoiding to comment on the conduct of the Election Commission, because it is very, very awkward and embarrassing. You know, that it becomes the question of a retired man commenting on his successors, which is the last thing I would like to do. But at the same time, if the Commission is getting such a battering and it is choosing to keep quiet, I think that is not a good option. The silence is not a good option. They should speak up. They should hit back. They should answer.
Yes.
And if they are not doing it, all of us should be doing it. And that is what I've tried to say through this article. It's more an expression of my anguish at what is happening, and the fact that the Election Commission is getting the beating. I'm not very happy about that.
Dr. Quraishi, in the article you have mentioned that it took repeated raps on its knuckles by the Supreme Court for the Election Commission to crack the whip. It is a pity that we needed the Supreme Court to remind the EC of the powers it always had. Isn't that effectively being weak-kneed, to require so many reminders and to not take any action until being reminded by the Supreme Court that it needs to do something?
Yes, quite right. In fact, this was something which came in for a lot of flack from the media, that the Supreme Court asked the Election Commission whether you have the power. The first day Election Commission said they have no power, they are toothless. And then when the Chief Justice persisted, then suddenly they discovered the power which they always had, and they used that power in the next 24 hours. So now, who do you blame? Not the Supreme Court. I would say that the Election Commission should have used that power in the first place. So the Supreme Court had to remind. What I have written in my article is something a little more serious than that. Article 329 had debarred the courts from interfering once the process of election has been set in motion. Now, this is a principle which was endorsed by the Supreme Court itself in the very first year of its operation in 1951 or 52. They said the Article 329 is absolutely clear, the court should not interfere. For the last 70 years, it has happened many times that a high court tried to interfere. Look, your electoral roll is not perfect. Why are you doing the election on such dates and not such date? We would not have been able to hold elections at all if the courts were allowed to interfere, which was the wisdom of the constitution framers and the judges of the Supreme Court who said, yes, hands-off policy. Now, in such a situation, for 70 years, it has happened that whenever a court tried to interfere, we went to Supreme Court, and in 30 seconds, Supreme Court threw out that judgment. Now, in the last 2 months, 5 times the Supreme Court had to remind the Election Commission of something, about its powers, about its delays and things. So, which has very serious implications for the future. That also is what I've tried to highlight.
Right. Dr. Quraishi, you did mention in your article, and this is something we must talk about, the clean chits that were handed to the Prime Minister and BJP President Amit Shah. You've mentioned the fact that you believe that dissent among the election commissioners is a good sign. It is a sign that that objective deliberation perhaps still exists. What would you have done, and I want your personal opinion on those clean chits? Do you believe that there was any violation of the code in those 5 cases? Do you believe that perhaps if you were in that panel, you would have dissented as well?
Well, I would rather not comment on the merit of the judgment because I don't have the full facts. But what I know on that basis, I can comment. One thing I would certainly not have done, not waited 25 days or 30 days to start a process on these. Now, a complaint of any kind against any politician is serious enough. But complaint against the top leadership of the country and the whole nation is watching, what is required is immediate action. 24 hours, maximum 48 hours, which is what we do. In fact, if you go into the very character of the model code of conduct, there have been attempts in the past that model code of conduct is toothless because all you can do is censure or warn a politician. You cannot take any more serious action.
Yes.
But we still defend, we think that the moral authority of the model code is very, very serious. And the difference between the model code and why we don't want what is called statutory backing to the model code, the moment you have an act, it goes into the domain of the judiciary. Then all these actions, you will see action on them only after 5 years or 10 years. The fact that we have retained model code as a flexible instrument, so that it is like a fire brigade. If there is fire, we have to extinguish it now, right then. Who caused it, what was the conspiracy, all that is a matter of detail which may happen in due course, but we have to extinguish the fire.
Yes.
We cannot wait for 30 days. And suppose, the commission had acted on the very first day, second day, probably the 7 other violations would not have taken place.
Yes. Dr. Quraishi, there's also the case of Tej Bahadur Yadav, whose candidature was declared invalid by the Election Commission. He has approached the Supreme Court. The Congress party, along with other members of the opposition, have approached the Supreme Court against the clean chits handed to the Prime Minister. Do you believe the Supreme Court will, or in spite of the laws at the time, has the jurisdiction to re-look at or open these cases after the EC decisions?
You're talking of the returning officer turning down the nomination?
Yes.
So, there I would like to explain to you that the returning officer's power is laid down in the law itself. Even Election Commission has no power to sit in judgment. RO is an independent legal authority. We can suspend him, we can transfer him if we are not happy, but we cannot tell him what he has to do, and we cannot question his judgment. That judgment can only be questioned in an election petition or petition before the Supreme Court. So the matter has gone to the Supreme Court. I have no idea about the merit of this case, whether it was rejected a right or wrong reason. But RO had full power. Election Commission has nothing to do with it.
Okay. And last question, your advice, Dr. Quraishi, to the current Election Commission, because like you have said, that the trust deficit that will take place, and if the people lose their trust in the Election Commission, they're perhaps also going to lose trust in democracy. What would be your advice right now to the current Election Commissioner and the team that works with him?
Well, I would hesitate to give any advice to the Election Commission. They are very experienced, very wise people. They probably know what they are doing. But if they were to ask for my opinion, I would say that they should be, number one, they should be prompt and they should be more communicative. Because if doubts persist in the mind of the people, that becomes dangerous. My own experience is it is very easier to convince the political parties. Call an all-party meeting, let's give them a hearing, listen to them. We arrive at a consensus. Even VVPAT was introduced as a result of an all-party meeting where they voiced their grievances against the EVM and they were suggested this solution. We immediately on the spot accepted it and asked the two companies to start making those things. This happened in October 2010. So I personally believe in talking, communicating with the stakeholders. Now, to say that we have already answered 6 months ago or 10 months ago is not the answer. If a question is being raised again and again, we have to answer again and again, because the fear is that it is penetrating the mind of the people. If the common people lose trust in the EVM or VVPAT or Election Commission, it will be very, very difficult to handle. I've been going around the world telling them that the beauty of Indian election has been that the results have never been questioned, because the Election Commission is the most trusted institution. In fact, I have said, probably in this article also, that many times we got away with some genuine bona fide mistakes because people condoned them, because they trusted us. Now, if they start mistrusting the institution, even their bona fide actions, let me complete this. If they start mistrusting the institution, the danger is that even the bona fide and genuine action will be suspected, and the question will be, the commission will be questioned, which is not fair to the commission also.
Well, I do want to ask you this. Your first sentence of your article says, mentions the appalling conduct of our leaders that should really, that should come under criticism at this point. Do you believe right now the slow action of the Election Commission has resulted in this appalling conduct? And in your opinion, is this the worst conduct you have seen from political leaders in an election? Has it ever been this bad? There are mentions of dead prime ministers and their track record. There's mention, ill talk really about now deceased police officers. Calling of people of different religions to vote in a block, calling of people to vote based on the achievements of the army, the martyrs of the army, and things far worse than that. Have you ever seen an election less murky than this one?
Well, I have seen that every election we hear these sentences that this is the worst election, they say the hate speech is worse than ever before. We hear all that every time. But if you were to quantify it, let us see in every election how many complaints were received against the top leadership. The numbers themselves will tell you a tale. The fact that the complaints are coming, complaint against the chief minister or the top leadership was very, very rare. Here it is coming twice a day. So this is something to be worried about, not just for the Election Commission, for the people, but for their leadership also. They should be very careful. They have to set an example. Their conduct in of the model code during the campaign should be a model code for everybody to follow. Here we find the maximum complaints are coming against the top leadership. Now, the top leadership, and I mean the Prime Minister in this case specifically, he has taken an oath of upholding the Constitution and defending the constitutional institution. Here, because of his actions, the right or wrong, which will be decided by the competent authorities, the fact that the Election Commission is being tested every day. Election Commission is getting a beating every day for, of course, they have been slow in responding because somebody created that cause of action. That cause of action is coming from somewhere, which is when I say that political leadership, their conduct, they have to be watchful themselves. They have to set an example rather than becoming the problem themselves. Yes. And secondly, let me tell you, if the action had been taken in the very first day, like, remember in the case of UP Chief Minister, he was debarred from campaigning for 72 hours. Has he repeated the offense after that? No. None of the leaders probably repeated the offense. So therefore, a timely action, even a notice would have had a deterrence
Yes.
effect, which opportunity we missed.
Dr. Quraishi, many thanks for your time. I'm very grateful that you've been able to give us time this evening and speak to our audience about your opinion right now of how the Election Commission is handling this current election. We're going to take a very quick break. We'll come back on the other side as the select committee of 3 judges have given the Chief Justice of India a clean chit. Women across the country have come out in protest. We'll find out why on the other side. Don't go anywhere.